Greetings from Tokyo. My name is Daisuke Beppu, and how are you doing? I hope all of you are doing really great today. Again, I really want to beg your pardon, but if you have a moment, I'd really much like to share with you another 5 by Criterion. Should mention that all the films that I'm going to talk about will also be listed in the description box, which is below this video, or to the side of this video. I'm not sure, but I think it's to the below of this video, and I'll put time stamps by each title. So if you want to skip to a particular title, you can just click on that timestamp, or just go to the point in time in the video, and you'll get to that discussion of that film immediately. I won't do any spoilers or any specific plot points, so please don't worry about that. But still, I understand if you don't want to listen to a particular take on a film, or you want to listen just to one take. I perfectly get it. So if you are one of those people, please feel free to look at the description box at the titles that I'm going to talk about in this video. And with that, let's begin, shall we? Spine number 767, My Beautiful Laundrette. This is from 1985, directed by Stephen Frears. So this is the film, which is a British film. And it is a film which is about many things, but in essence it's about the British Pakistani community, which is living in the southern part of London. And there are a lot of things going on in this film, and that's one of the real delights, I would say, of My Beautiful Laundrette. It's not a film that is about one singular thing, but it's a film that is about many things that seem disparate, and yet you know that they are really well connected. This film is, as I say, 1985 film, and this is a release from the Criterion Collection, which is a Blu-ray. This is a restored 2K digital transfer. And it also includes supplements such as a conversation with director Stephen Frears. It also has interviews with Hanif Qureshi, the screenwriter, and also the producers Tim Bevan and Sarah Radcliffe, which is the partnership which formed the company Working Title, which I think is very well known amongst cineasts and, let's say, people who know certain American films from the 1990s onwards. And also there is another supplement with an interview with the director of cinematography, Oliver Stapleton. So, as I said, this is a film about the British Pakistani community in London, or certain characters that are connected or related to that community. And at the center of the story is the wonderful relationship between Omar and Johnny. So you've got this relationship between these two men, Omar and Johnny, which I think forms the core emotional center point. And it's around them, or it's through them, or it's maybe tangential to them, that we get other pockets of this story as the film unfolds in this really wonderful tapestry of varying characters. And I should say this, Hanif Qureshi wrote the screenplay, and he's a really such a famous and highly renowned writer and author. If you don't know who Hanif Qureshi is, I highly suggest that you take a moment and just look him up online. It's really interesting. And he wrote the screenplay, and it's really an interesting screenplay, I would say, because he deals with many characters in a way that is not, how shall I put it? Well, okay, so the film deals with a relationship, a romantic relationship between these two men, Omar and Johnny, and they come from different backgrounds, both economically, socially, and also culturally. It would be so, or it would have been so easy, I should imagine, to have such a story be set, let's say, within the backdrop of a very racially charged film. And when I say racially charged, I mean, let's say, a film that has its themes of, let's say, race and the issues of integration and the issues of immigration and the issues of, let's say, cross-cultural relationships and the possibility or the impossibilities of such in within the certain context of a modern urban society. It would have been very simple, well, not simple, it would have been very, maybe with the times perhaps, to have made a film that would have been very raw and rough and angry and maybe even violent. But what's so remarkable about this film is that it doesn't take any of those options. It instead opts to make a film that is quite, how shall I say, it's quite potent when it comes to its discussion of issues of, let's say, the immigration and the diaspora of the British Pakistani society and culture within Britain, within London, and you're dealing with very violent situations involving, let's say, certain aspects of British society. But that's not on the forefront, I would say. There's a lot going on, and what I mean by that is that these people feel like people, and they don't feel like they are characters that represent something other than what they are supposed to be. In other words, they don't feel like characters that represent bigger ideas in terms of the composition of a drama. Rather, they feel like fleshed out real human beings with real issues and real concerns. And each of the characters really have that fullness of dimension, which I really, really appreciate and admire. So, for example, you have Omar, who is a very young. He's young. He's a bit of an upstart. He seems to be a bit maybe shallow and maybe a bit impatient at first, but you really come to love him, and you really admire his work ethic and the way that he treats people, and he understands the importance of work. Granted, of course, he and Johnny tend to earn money through, let's say, dubious means sometimes, but not all the time. But it's all towards trying to make a living for himself, and which is that kind of work ethic and way of life that has been bestowed upon him by his uncle, primarily, Nasser. So that is really wonderful. You have Omar, who's a really fleshed out, fully realized human being of a character. And then, of course, you have Johnny, who is also equally as fleshed out. And he has a certain maybe dubious background himself. He himself, at one point in the film, calls himself a fascist because of certain tendencies that he had towards the Pakistani community when he was younger. But his relationship with Omar seems to help him to break free from those thoughts that he had previously espoused in his life. And it's a real charming evolution of character that we see him go through. And then you have the other characters as well, Nasser, the uncle, and you have the father, Omar's father, who represented they are brothers, but they represent two different approaches, especially with respect to Omar's upbringing. Nasser, who's given more screen time in the film, he represents the entrepreneur spirit of the immigrant experience, and he really has a certain vibrancy and charm. I mean, you see him immediately and you realize that he might be a little bit shady. He might be a little bit maybe he's not the best of fathers or the best of husbands at some points in the film, but in the end you realize who he is and what he is about. He is about making a living and proving himself in Mrs. Thatcher's Britain, and he doesn't mince words about it. He is really to the point, and I really admire that. He doesn't hide who he is. And the same is true, I think, for Papa, the father of Omar, who is apparently very sickly when you first see him at the opening moments of the film. And you realize that he had a certain intellectual background. He had certain maybe some event or events caused him, perhaps physically and perhaps emotionally and mentally, to become the person that he is at the start of the film. And he doesn't espouse necessarily this kind of work ethic that his brother Nasser espouses. Rather, he really wants Omar to go to college and to have an education. So it seems like education and learning and scholarship is what is key to an intellectual like Papa. And then you have just other great characters in the film that flesh out the borders in a way that is so charming and lovely. You have Salim, who is seemingly the villain of the piece, but really he's much more complicated than that, and you realize that there is much going on with his character and the way he connects with the Pakistani culture here in London. And he's a really fascinating character, I should say. There's also Tanya, the young daughter of Nasser, who has a real, she has a real wonderful arc, her character. She starts out the film in a way that you think she's maybe a little bit, you think one way about her character, but you realize that she has a totally different sense of who she is and what she wants to be, and how that maybe complements with the ways of her family and her father and mother, but other times that might conflict with those ways. And it's that conflict and complementary nature of her background and upbringing that really brings a real richness to her part of the story. It's really fascinating to see how she develops as the film goes on. And again, if you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I should say also that the film's screenplay is really nice. And this is going to sound like a criticism. I don't mean it quite this way, but there are times when the dialogue from characters seems to be a bit too on point. The characters seem to be saying certain lines or certain phrases that seem to be too on the nose with respect to maybe veiled or nuanced references or criticisms with respect to Mrs. Thatcher's Britain, or with respect to certain issues about being a Pakistani descent in London, etc. But that is, I think, one of the great things about, let's say, the direction of Mr. Stephen Frears. He never puts it to the forefront, as it were. He always, tones it down in a way that doesn't draw attention to itself. So in other words, it's not like a grand moment where a character says something about, I am an entrepreneur, or I have the capitalist spirit or something. When some line is said like that, it is seemingly on the nose. The direction of the film is such that it's toned down, so it's not in your face, which I really admire and respect. There's a real nice balance between the potency of the script and the and sort of the modesty, and I mean that in the most complimentary of ways, the modesty of the direction and the presentation of the story. And I think that goes back to my initial point, which is I think it would have been I think, really interesting and perhaps just as great a film. It would have been easier, perhaps, to have the relationship between Omar and Johnny be at the forefront of the film, and then to have every character revolve around that particular relationship. But really, that's not the only component. And again, just like with the dialogue, Stephen Frears, or let's say the whole the people behind the story, seem to give so much respect to all the people around that story in order to give everything else its due attention and time, which is just a wonderful way of telling a story. It's rich and full and vibrant, which is why this film, My Beautiful Laundrette, is an absolute gem in the Criterion collection. It's so wonderful to see this film here. If you haven't seen it, you really should. It's a challenging film, but in a way that's not confrontational to the viewer, and so I think that is a real feat of filmmaking brilliance. So therefore, it's not difficult for me at all to recommend watching My Beautiful Laundrette. Spy number 360. Symbiopsychotaxiplasm. Symbiopsychotaxiplasm. This is a very fascinating and interesting film by a gentleman whose name is Mr. William Greaves. So please remember this name, William Greaves. To try to distill the film to its very essence, I'm probably not going to do a very good job, but let me just give it my my effort here. Anyway, so Symbiopsychotaxiplasm is a film about a group of people trying to shoot a film, or it's a screen test of a certain situation between two characters. So you've got this kind of, it's like it almost feels like a drama school exercise. So in other words, a group of people are trying to stage a particular scene that takes place between these two characters. And the scene that they're trying to stage is essentially a drama that's playing out between a man and a woman. I believe that they are a couple. So the woman's name, the character's name is Alice, and the man's name, the character's name, is Freddie. So you have this scene between these two characters, Alice and Freddie, and how it plays out. And then you have the crew trying to film that scene by employing different actors. At one stage you have a set of actors playing out the scene, and then you have a completely different set of actors playing out the scene again, and you have a completely different set of actors playing out the scene again, and then you have yet another set of actors playing out the scene again. And it's really a sort of a fascinating look at how how the process is played out in terms of how to draw out performances from an actor or actress, or how to prepare a particular scene, how to find the drama or the emotional core within a particular moment of a particular portion of a scene, how to avoid certain traps of dramatic interplay, etc. And I think if that were it with this film, I think it would have been maybe an interesting film, but maybe one that would have been lost maybe just to the footnotes of cinema history. But the thing about this film is that it is much more than that, which is what makes it really interesting indeed. I guess maybe the place to start would be that, well, let me just give you a little bit more background first, I suppose. So the film that is included on this release by Criterion is actually, I guess technically speaking, there are two films. So the first film is called Symbiopsychotexiplasm Take 1. This was from 1968, and it was assembled around the late 60s, and I believe it was released in 1971. And then, when I say release, I should say it was shown. It was completed and it was shown in 1971, but I don't think it ever was able to get a proper release in theaters. Then you have Symbiopsychotexiplasm Take 2.5, which is from 2003. Now, this is interesting because Symbiopsychotexiplasm Take 1, which is from the late 60s, is basically an assembly of footage from the shoot or shoots that took place in Central Park during that time with William Greaves and his crew. And then Symbiopsychotexiplasm Take 2.5 uses some of the footage that was not seen or not used from that. And then it goes into the future or the present day, and it talks about William Greaves, and it talks about the crew, or at least some of the crew members and some of the cast, as it were, that were involved in the original or Take 1 of Symbiopsychotexiplasm. And also, I think Steve Buscemi is also involved, and so therefore it's a little bit of a continuation of the story. When I say story, I mean it's a continuation of the drama of the two characters, Alice and Freddie. So you see that drama played out, what happens to those two characters, what is it, 30 years later, 35 years later or so. And it's a really interesting turn of events that happens to those two characters. So that story alone, that story thread alone about Alice and Freddie, their story in Take 1, and then their story as it progressed 35 years later into Take 2.5. That alone is really interesting. But then you also have the story of the crew and William Greaves, the director, and how the crew interacts with this director. And that is one of the fascinating things about this set, Take 1 and Take 2.5. Take 1 involves or shows scenes where the director is talking with his crew. And also it involves scenes where the crew apparently seems to be rebelling against the director. They seem to be openly criticizing the director, talking about how they don't understand the focus and the purpose of the film. They are complaining on film, and it's all included in the film. And then you have the continuation or the discussion of that idea or the thread of that idea as it continues on into Take 2.5. So all of this package comes together in a film that you're not even sure. I'm not even sure if it's a documentary, or is it a metafiction documentary, or is it one of those metafiction documentaries? Is it a film within a film within a film, or even is it a film within a film within a film within a film? And so I'm left wondering, as a viewer, am I watching something that is real? Am I watching something that is not real, that is fictionalized? Is it a hybrid of the two? And if so, what degree of that hybridization is real? What degree of that hybridization is not real? Am I being played as a viewer? Is William Greaves playing me? Is the William Greaves that I'm seeing on screen, is this an act? Are these rants by these other crew members, such as the Jonathan Gordon? Is this a rant, or is this fake, or is this dramatized? And you have all these other aspects that are there, the idea of reality versus non-reality, and how it's transposed, for example, in the way that the scenes, the Alice Freddie scenes are being played out. There's this focus, for example, on Stanislavski method of acting, method acting, trying to draw some kind of real experience from the actors in order to present that or to connect that to one's performance with respect to a particular character. And so this whole notion and interplay between reality and fiction is one really primary component of this film that is really great, and that goes to the heart, I think, of what symbiopsychotaxiplasm is. In Take 2.5, there's a really wonderful scene towards the beginning where William Greaves, the director, is talking to an audience in a theater after having viewed the film Symbiopsychotaxiplasm Take 1. And he's talking and he says really interesting comments, but one of the things he says is he talks about the reason why the film was called Symbiopsychotaxiplasm, because he borrowed the term symbiotaxiplasm from sociologist Arthur Bentley, and the term symbiotaxiplasm, as described by William Greaves, is all those events that life and that human beings share and experienced, and that human beings are involved with, which impact the physical, social, and material environment, and which affect their characters and personalities. So therefore he describes it as being that all developments of social and human history are as a result of the interchange or the dialogue that occurs between the individual and his or her own environment. So therefore the idea is that we are essentially continually in discussion or conversation or exchange or interplay with the environment around us. So therefore, if the environment is different, that leads to a different discussion. And furthermore, if the environment is ever changing, that leads to a discussion or interchange or dialectic or dialogue that is continually in flux. So that is the exciting notion that is at play in symbiopsychotaxiplasm. And Greaves goes further. Greaves goes further. He says that he had the audacity to inject the word psycho into the term symbiotaxiplasm to create the phrase symbiopsychotaxiplasm, because he says he wanted to evoke the mental mechanism that is involved in this exchange or dialogue or interplay, which is a really fascinating and I think quite mind-blowing concept, because you realize that is indeed what's going on. So when I thought about this, I realized that all the comments that I made previously about reality, fiction, nonfiction, etc., I think ultimately they are maybe they might sound lofty, but I think ultimately they're quite meaningless, because I think the more important issue here, or the more important theme with this film, is this idea of maybe the process or the dilemma in capturing truth and reality via film. And you need to employ certain techniques, sometimes fiction, sometimes maybe metafiction, in order to capture that truth, whatever that may mean in the particular context of that time. So with that lens, watching the film Symbiopsychotaxiplasm Take 1 and Symbiopsychotaxiplasm Take 2.5, you realize that it doesn't even matter that it's fiction or that you doubt that it's real. It feels real. I don't know if that makes any sense. And because of that, and because of the challenges of watching a film that's really quite complex as Symbiopsychotaxiplasm, you really get much joy out of watching this film. You realize that you're watching something real without necessarily believing that it's real. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's just a real refreshing take. You have a real simple setup just a bunch of guys trying to make a movie in Central Park, New York. That's it. I mean, it doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But when you watch it, you realize that there are a lot of things going on, and a lot of discussions, and a lot of just a lot of issues of identity and how to present oneself, and acting and reality. All these things come together in a really wonderful package that is Symbioopsychotaxiplasm Take 1 and Symbioopsychotaxiplasm Take 2.5. This particular release from the Criterion Collection includes a wonderful documentary called Discovering William Greaves, and also there's a wonderful interview with Steve Buscemi. But the documentary I would highly recommend because it shows the background of this fascinating man, Mr. William Greaves, and his background and where he is at now. But he had an acting background, and he is very intelligent and very he's very charming as a speaker, which is very interesting too, because sometimes, as you will see from the film, William Greaves, as he's depicted in the film Symbioopsychotaxiplasm, is not always the most pleasant of men, and which is an interesting contrast to the way that he presents himself in Symbioopsychotaxiplasm Take 2.5, or in the documentary that's included in the Criterion Collection. So again, what is real, what is not? I don't know. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend watching Symbioopsychotaxiplasm. Spy number 426, The Ice Storm. This is from 1997. This is directed by Mr. Ang Lee. The Ice Storm is a film that is set in 1970s Connecticut. So, and the town in Connecticut is called New Canaan, Connecticut. It is quite a wealthy town, actually, even as it's in reality as well as its depiction in the film. I actually lived in the town next to the town New Canaan, Connecticut. I used to live in the United States when I was a little boy, and the place that my family lived was in Connecticut, and it was in a place called, we used to live in a city, or in a town called Darien, Connecticut, but then we also lived in a place called, or I went to school in a city called Stamford, Connecticut. And New Canaan, Connecticut was very near. It was maybe the next town over. So I had many friends there. Not many, I had a few friends there in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I know some of the locations that were used in filming of the Ice Storm. So there's a park that Elijah Wood and Christina Ricci walked through. It's called Waverly Park, I think. So I remember walking around there with my dogs when they were still alive. And I know the town where Christina Ricci rides her bike through, that's central New Canaan, and the famous train station stop of New Canaan. Yes, I know that's a lovely platform. I'm not sure if it's there anymore, but yes. So sorry about that little aside in my personal life, but I think that's one of the reasons why I really connect with this film, because of the associations that I have with the town of New Canaan. The Hoods and the Carvers. The Hoods are the family, the Joan Allen, Kevin Kline family, with Tobey Maguire and Christina Ricci. They are a very they're a very fine family, but obviously there are a lot of issues that concern them, in particular issues between Elena and Ben, the husband and wife. They're quite serious, fundamentally serious issues with respect to their marriage, and it's to see how that issue plays out with themselves is one of the core aspects of the film. Then you also have the issues of growing up with the two distinct stories. The son in college, dealing with being away, living away, and also dealing with maybe certain maybe sexual awakenings that are just are about to come to fruition, perhaps. Certainly there are some issues of sexual awakening and exploration with respect to the daughter as well. This idea of growing up and trying to find one's identity, and it's a really tender story, I think, with that particular family. And how it plays out, and the successes and failures of each of those stories and their interactions. It's really quite heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. I don't want to spoil it, but I really should say here that there's just one scene that gets me all the time, and it's that scene. Again, I don't want to give too much plot context here, but it's the scene between the father and the daughter. After a certain event has happened, they meet each other, and quite coincidentally, and I think they're walking home. It's just the two of them, the father and daughter, and and they stop, and she asks him to to carry her, and so he carries her on his back, and he just walks home slowly with her on his back. And she's, this grown, she's not a little girl anymore. She's becoming more and more of a grown woman, but she's still his child, his daughter. And that scene just thinking about it now just really gets to me. That's a really lovely scene, really poignant, so just so expertly played by Christina Ricci and Kevin Kline. Just a lovely scene. Perhaps that's probably my favorite part of the film, actually. And also there's also interplay with another family. The other family, which is, I think, their neighbors, which is the Carvers, right? And the Carvers is Jim and Janie. So you have the wonderful actor James Sheridan playing the husband, and then you have the wonderful actor Sigourney Weaver playing the wife, and then you have their children. What are their names? Sandy and Mikey, the two sons. And you also realize that there are some really significant emotional issues with this family as well, with respect to how their children are interacting, what their personalities are, and what they are doing. There seem to be some issues there, and so you realize that there is some interplay that goes on with this family, the Carvers, and then the other family, their neighbors, the Hoods, and then how that plays out and how they interact and interweave with each other. And then you have certain events that occur further in the famous or infamous ice storm that occurs in the plot, which is a very key component of the film. And certain key dramatic events happen, and you're left, I guess, emotionally drained and just transformed and moved and unsure and completely in wonder and in awe of this powerful film that by the end of it you realize I realize at the end of it, what I have been so privileged to watch. It's what a lucky, fortunate man I am to have been able to watch such a remarkable film as The Ice Storm is. It's a tough film, I'd say. It's a tough film, and it gets tougher with age. As I get older, I find that it's quite a difficult film to watch for many reasons. I think because I realize that I am getting older, but also because there are certain points about that it touches upon in terms of family and in terms of the relationships between spouses that I think it makes one think. It certainly does. It's quite thought-provoking, and therefore highly recommended. This particular release, if you don't mind, just very quickly, it's a 2K restoration or digital film transfer, and there's also a wonderful commentary with James Seamus and Ang Lee. I always love their partnerships. That's a really great partnership, I'd say. There's also a nice documentary. There's also an interview with the author of the book, Mr. Rick Moody, and there's also some deleted scenes, and there are some interviews, etc., and there's some other nice supplementary materials. But The Ice Storm is I think it is a key, important example of American cinema from the late 90s, and I think it is one that is going to stay in the conversation in years to come. And I hope it becomes more popular amongst cineast circles. I think it is already, but maybe it should be gaining some more steam, I think, because it has a lot to say, and it says it really well and really poetically, and there's some moments that just completely floor you, to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if you are left crying, being so moved after watching a film of this beauty, and as The Ice Storm is. Anyway, The Ice Storm, a film by director Ang Lee. This is spine number 852. The title of this film is LAUNDRETte. Again, the title of this film is LAUNDRETte. However, the English release has been given this title of Black Girl. And I think that's a really interesting choice of title. And I think it's interesting because it seems to me, anyway, to be very appropriately emblematic of the film, in the sense that it is at once seemingly dismissive and anonymous, and at the same time it is so powerful and to the point because of its anonymity and because of its dismissiveness, if you get my meaning. So the original title, however, is La Noirde, but the English title, as given here, is Black Girl. And the film Black Girl is from 1966. It is a very short film, relatively speaking. It is only about 1 hour. So in terms of length, it should be, I'm sorry, I really hate that discussion about, it's a short film, it's a long film, therefore it's an easy watch or not easy watch. I don't think so. I think it really depends on the content. But at the same time, I understand that the length of a film is very important to a lot of people. So I apologize. I shouldn't have said I hate that discussion. I apologize. I take that back. I should have said that I personally don't believe that that's important. But I do sympathize with people who do think that the length of a film is important. But if it is important to you, let me just say it is about 1 hour in length, and it is a film that is directed by Ousmane Sembène, who is a filmmaker from Senegal. Now, this is a film about a young woman who's from Senegal, and she is a maid who comes to France to work as a maid in this small household that is run by Monsieur and Madame. And that's it. That's the story, essentially. And it is a simple tale. It's a tale that let me just say it, it's something that you'd probably read in the newspaper and probably just read a little bit about and then maybe forget about, but not Sembène. He doesn't do that. In fact, he makes a point not to do that. In fact, he realizes that this is a story that is so potentially forgettable and unrelatable, and you just read about it and just walk away and that's it. But no, he doesn't allow that. He makes you remember the story. He makes you remember it in a way that is powerful, in a way that is gut-wrenching, in a way that makes you angry and infuriated, and that all of that is a great thing, because that is a mark of a film that works. That is a mark of a film that is important, and this film, in those terms, is incredibly important indeed. Again, it's a short film, and there is a very wonderful kind of structure in the way it's filmed. It's not completely linear. It's a slightly non-linear way of telling the story. You get flashbacks, etc. But it's so, how should I put it? It's so relatable in terms of the way the story is presented. You have a young girl, and you get her inner monologues in French, which is, I think, a key point. And you have Madame, the woman of the household, and she works for Madame, and Madame is probably one of those great villains in cinematic history. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness! I hate Madame so much. I hate that character so much. She makes me so angry. And it's such a wonderful performance. Yes, it's such a wonderful performance. It's the whole point is to make you angry, and Madame as a character is really one of the most infuriating characters I think I've ever encountered in a film in the Criterion Collection. And wonderful. And it's, of course, because we identify and we care so much about the young girl, Duana, and so we care for her. We want to see her succeed. We want her to realize her dreams of, some kind of freedom, of some kind of maybe liberation, of maybe an awareness of what she is and who she is and how she functions in this newly formed society, at least in her eyes. And yes, that's the crux of the film. And so you see who she is from flashbacks. You see where she came from, and you realize more about where she comes from, because Semben gives her the respect that she deserves in terms of giving us her kind of background with her family back home, and also giving us her thoughts about how she feels and the struggles that she feels, and the internal, turmoil that she is experiencing with respect to this particular situation that she finds herself in this seemingly terrible situation of employment. My goodness. Yes, it's one of those films that it really, it's at times very shocking. It's at times quite ambiguous and ambivalent, I would say. I mean, there's a particular character, I would say also the character of Monsieur, that is handled in the film in a way that still to this day I'm not sure if we were meant to like him or if we're meant not to like him, or maybe that's the whole point. That's a comment that the filmmaker is making in terms of a broader statement on the issue of colonialism and the long-lasting impacts, culturally speaking, of colonialism, even to today's society. So, so maybe that ambiguity is made on purpose. In which case, my goodness, the power of this film, has grown in my mind tenfold. And it was already a powerful film to begin with. So this is a vital film, and it's a film that I'm so glad I was able to watch through the Criterion Collection, because it is just how should I put it? I'm amazed how much I was able to identify with this story of Duana. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's just it affected me just so fundamentally on that level. I almost felt that I was her, because I was so engrossed with her story, and I wanted her to. I was supporting her, and I was rooting for her, and I still am rooting for her. And it was an amazing kind of transformative viewing experience that I had. It was quite stunning, actually. And so I was there all the way to the end of the film, and when the film ended, it was it was. I mean this in a very complimentary way. I felt scarred by the experience, and therefore this is so easy for me to recommend. Black Girl, which is the English title. Again, the original title is LAUNDRETTE. So please remember that. This particular release from the Criterion Collection is the 4K digital restoration, World Cinema Project related restoration, which is really nice thing that we should support the World Cinema Project. More World Cinema Project films, please. And also there is a great short film. I think it's Semben's first film called Borom Saret. Wonderful film. You should also watch that as well. And there are also interviews. Let's see, scholars. Yes, Mantia Diawara and Samba Gajigo. These are really great, by the way. They're very illuminating, and they taught me a lot. I admit I'm not as familiar with cinema from Senegal, but I'd like to know more. And so these are very helpful for me. And they also go into the background of Semben and his work and his history. Semben as a filmmaker and as a person, he has a really fascinating biography, and those some of those supplements go into some of the details about that. I mean, he started filmmaking when fairly late. I think when he was in his 40s, I think. So just a really fascinating background. You should look up his biography if you have a chance. And also there's a great interview with the actor who played Diwana. So Mbessine Thérèse Diop, she plays Diwana, the main character who's pictured here. Just the essential core of the film, and it's a wonderful interview. I love her comments, especially about how she felt about Semben. Of course, she has nothing but the utmost respect and reverence for the filmmaker, but she does talk about certain aspects about his directing style, which I think are quite illuminating from my viewpoint anyway. There's also, there's also a documentary, and also there's an alternate color sequence to a certain scene in the film as well. So the extras, I think, are quite full and rich here, which is just another reason to get this film. The primary reason, of course, being that the film is excellent. This is La Noire 2. Spy number 2, Seven Samurai. I admit to being incredibly intimidated right now, and I'm very nervous because I'm not sure if I'll be able to discuss this film in a way that is satisfactory to me and to you. And if I don't satisfy you in terms of the way I am about to talk about this film, please forgive me. I really, please forgive me. I don't mean any disrespect to this film at all. But I simply adore this film. This is a film that is directed by a gentleman whose name is Mr. Akira Kurosawa, and this was released in 1954. And this is a film that is set in the late 1400s, early 1500s era of Japanese history, called the Sengoku period. And basically it's a story about a village that's trying to protect itself from bandits. And the way it tries to protect itself is, well, some of the villagers, some of the leaders of the village decide to employ samurai. And they want to employ samurai so that the samurai will come and protect them from these bandits that are expected to come at a certain point in time in the future. And so that's the story. You have these villagers, these farmers, who employ samurai, and they are trying to fight off these bandits. So it's good guys versus bad guys. And that's it. That's the story. That's it. But if that indeed were it, that is not, that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface, does it not? Because this is a complete, full, rich film experience. It's probably one of the great film experiences that you will ever have. It certainly is one of the great film experiences that I have had the pleasure of experiencing. I remember seeing this film in a large screen. I think it was a 35 millimeter print of it, I think. And it was a really clean print, really pristine. And I saw it in my college when it was projected there. It was shown there for a screening, and I had the pleasure of sitting in that in that screening. And it was a full packed audience. It was a smallish auditorium, but it was a full packed audience, and we were mostly students. And I had a sense that maybe some of them, or maybe half of them, had never seen the film before, and they were kind of rowdy and laughing, sometimes a little bit inappropriately in places. But by the second half, when the film kicks in, they were screaming and shouting, and they were gasping and just in awe, and they were silent. We were all silent when certain things happened, and it was just stunning. It was probably the most stunning experience I've ever had watching a film in 35 in a theater. It was quite amazing, and it was Seven Samurai. Now, what is so great about this film? I mean, there's so many stuff that is great, or there's so much stuff that is great about this film. Let's start with the performances. You have great actors of the Japanese acting tradition coming here and giving quite varied performances, each one of them, led, of course, by Takashi Shimura, who plays the leader of the Seven Samurai, Kanbei, and he gives a very a muted, quiet performance because he is the leader, and he doesn't show anger or volatility except very rarely, and when he does, he means business. And then you have, contrasting the great performance by Takashi Shimura, the just stellar, unforgettable performance by the one and the only Toshiro Mifune as that lovable character, roguish character, Kikuchiyo. He is the seventh samurai. He is the ugly duckling of the bunch, as it were, but he is so charming and so endearing to the hearts and minds of the viewers and to the villagers, and he plays such an important role in bridging the gap between these classes, and they are different classes. You have the farmer class and you have the samurai class, and it's amazing to see, first of all, the gap that occurs or that exists between these two classes at the very beginning, but then you have certain interactions that occur as the film progresses, and of course you have the efforts by the great character Kikuchiyo as he bridges the gap that exists between these two classes, and then of course the conflict between the group and the bandits as they attack the village slowly brings everything into a wonderful social equilibrium, and then you realize that everyone is on the same plane, and then perhaps even the farmer class is becoming stronger than the samurai class. So it's really a wonderful way that that Kurosawa shows in this story, in this wonderful story, the idea of characters and their interplay and their relationship and their role in bridging class divides and showing us the existence of these class divides and emphasizing that. And in that context, I would say that not only then you have these characters who are very endearing and fun to watch, and it's great to root for them, but you also see them and how they play in the context of the class system. And I think in that sense, the story is as equally as relatable, I would say, to someone in today, 21st century. Class divides still exist, and so therefore it's a really it's about class. It's also about capitalism. This idea of what these people will do, this idea of some samurai won't do anything except for money, but for these samurai it's different. But there are some comments up there that exist with respect to that system, and so it's a really rich film in terms of how it treats these social issues. And Kurosawa does consider them as social issues. You can't deny that from the way that he sees the nobility of these samurai who are seemingly doing this not for much money or anything. It's not going to give them money or any kind of advancement politically or professionally, but it's something that they feel is sort of the right thing to do. And so therefore, versus those other samurai who refuse to take on this job because it doesn't offer pay or doesn't offer high status, etc. So there's a real commentary going on there by Kurosawa, which I think is implicit but interesting nonetheless. Then you have, of course, just the breathtaking action of the film. I think some of the action set pieces in this film are perhaps among the greatest action set pieces, or maybe they are the greatest action set pieces in the history of cinema, because you are just in awe of how real everything is, how palpable everything is. People are fighting, and there's dust, and there's smoke, and there's mud, and there's rain, and there are horses, and people are lashing at each other, and they're attacking, and they're full-throated attacks, and they're gasping and panting, and they're giving it their all, and you realize that this is a life and death thing for these people, these characters. And to have that enthrallment and to have that suspense laid out for you in such a wonderful presentation as these action sequences makes these action sequences, I think, the best, the absolute best. You're with these characters. That's the thing. I think there's probably something to be said about the fact that the bandits are maybe not as fleshed out as one might like them to be. I mean, they seem to be too much of like they are the anonymous bad guys. So maybe it would have been nice to see a little bit more of their backstory, I suppose. But I don't think that's the point of the story. I think the point of the story is essentially. The point of the storytelling is the farmers and the samurai and their interactions and how they work together and how the samurai help them. And in that context, it becomes a really fascinating film, because you get the strategy as well. You get very detailed, clear strategy about how the samurai plan to defeat the bandits. So you get the layout of the geography of the village. You have a certain strategy in terms of how to attack these bandits. You have the military mindset of Kanbei as the military strategic leader, and then you have all of the details covered. You see first of all, in other words, you see the analysis of the problem. And then you see the development of the plan. And then you see the preparations for the implementation of the plan. And then you see the implementation of the plan. And then you see the result. That's the film. That's the film. And it's so, it's really marvelous how captivating each of these steps is as it's being presented in the film. And then, you have certain sub-problems that stem off of that general plan. So in order to achieve A, we need to have X. So therefore, in order to have X, we need to analyze the problem, create a plan, prepare for implementation of the plan, and then implement the plan in order to get X, in order to serve our plan to get A, which is part of our bigger plan in order to achieve victory against the bandit. So it all plays out in this really intricate, detailed way, but still each component is so fascinating to follow, and it's really an easy watch in that respect, because all the information is being presented to you in such a delightful and easy to follow way. And I think that's really important, because it is a very full, rich experience, but it is quite exhausting, and it can be quite intimidating as well. So to have it be presented in a way that is digestible and that is accessible to someone in my position, especially because it takes a while for me to digest a story of a film, I think that's really helpful, and I think that helps make the film much more appealing to audiences, especially today's audiences. And if you haven't seen Seven Samurai, I don't know yeah, I don't know what to say. Yeah, if you haven't seen this film, I really don't know what to say. If you're going to have one Criterion Collection film to own on DVD, Blu-ray, if you're going to have one Criterion Collection film to own, I would go out on a limb and say that film should be Seven Samurai. Okay, I know there are so many great films. There are so many candidates for the best film in the Criterion Collection. Everyone has his or her own opinion, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate when I say this, but I'm prepared for that. If you're going to have one film, only one film from the Criterion Collection, it should be this, because it is at once intellectually stimulating and so emotionally captivating and such a thrilling action film. It is just the whole package. You get everything, absolutely everything in one film. And so therefore, if you're just going to get one film, it's got to be this. Okay, Seven Samurai. So that's how much I think you should watch this if you haven't seen this already. Excuse me. The 2-disc Blu-ray set of Seven Samurai includes the film itself, which is a wonderful digital transfer, and it has an uncompressed monaural soundtrack, and there are 2 commentaries. One which is a collection of one is a commentary by film, I guess, scholar Mr. Michael Jeck, and another is a collection of comments from various scholars and Japanese film experts. So those experts are very famous in the field of Japanese film studies. So David Desser, Joan Mellon, Stephen Prince, Tony Raines, and Donald Ritchie. I think those 2 commentaries are really good. I would say the latter, the one with the many experts that are commenting. I think that's probably, for me, maybe the stronger of the commentaries, but they're both quite fine commentaries. Then the second disc includes the supplements, which is, let's see, the first being the documentary, the documentary and the making of the Seven Samurai, which is part of that series, Akira Kurosawa, It Is Wonderful to Create. It's a Japanese documentary. And then you have another documentary, which is Seven Samurai, Origins and Influences. A documentary looking at the samurai traditions and films that helped shape Kurosawa's masterpiece. And then you have a great booklet and essay. And then there are trailers. I should say one thing, though. I love this film very much, but the original Japanese trailer is quite terrible, because the trailer, I think, gives away many plot points, and I think it gives away kind of the general gist of what happens at the end. It actually shows a shot of what happens at the end, and it says this is what happened at the end of Seven Samurai, and you just get the shot of what happened, which is, I mean, I understand that the mindset behind making a trailer like that. I completely appreciate it, but at the same time, I find it kind of hilarious. Especially in today's society, where people like myself are very sensitive about knowing what happens at the end of a film before watching it. So I would say don't watch any of the trailers at all until you have seen the film and know what happens at the end of the film. Okay, so that is Seven Samurai, again from 1954, Akira Kurosawa. That concludes this 5 by Criterion. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope my comments were not too unsatisfactory to you. If they were, or if you have any disagreement, please feel free to let me know. I'm very happy to hear those, and I'm very happy to be corrected at any point. I'm also very happy to get any comments that you have or any questions if you want to continue the discussion on these or any other films perhaps. I'm also open to getting any suggestions or recommendations from you of any films that you think are worthwhile and worth talking about. I'm just I'm not a film scholar. I'm not a film expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a guy on YouTube, and I don't know as much as I would like to know, and I think the only way for me to be able to know more is to learn from people like you, and to hear comments and suggestions from people like you, because I think that gives me such a wonderful opportunity and look into your experiences and your viewpoints and your perspectives, that and sharing those with me is one of the great and the ability for me to read those and your willingness to share those with me is really one of the great delights and privileges I have of making videos and putting them up on YouTube like this. So I really want to thank you so much for giving me that opportunity, and I hope to continue to keep having those opportunities as we move forward. Again, thank you very much for your time, and I hope all of you have a great rest of your day, and see you very soon. Cheers.